All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Sadly, my wife can't make it tonight. She's not feeling so great. So I've been asked to step into her shoes and share some of the thoughts that she would have shared just by way of introduction. Firstly, I want to start off by wishing a big mazel tov to Rabbi and Rebbe Hughes, who sadly won't be joining us tonight because they just had a baby girl. So we wish them only simchas in the future. And, you know, the concept of the Power Hour started 10 years ago in our small little shul building. And we are so honored and thrilled. It's such a merit to be able to see how this has been spearheaded by all of us together in unison to create this incredible program with such a far reach to all the communities. And now it's even going beyond that to Essex. And we're just so grateful that you've taken the time before Chanukah to join us tonight to be inspired. Deborah wanted to make the following point of one of the reasons that we decided tonight to really bring together the rabbis and the Rebbetzins is that we often forget that one of the heroines of the Chanukah story wasn't only the Maccabees who were the men, but it was also Yehudit. And for the Jewish world to really function, we need both the heroes and both the heroines. And they taught us, and she taught us about courage and about inner strength of the Jewish people in times of adversity, which is really one of the main themes that runs through Chanukah. And if we think particularly back over the last 8 months or so, yes, we've had the care workers that have been there and all the incredible people that have been doing whatever they could to help in these pressing times. But really the rabbis and rebbetzins also deserve a massive yashar koach and a thank you for really stepping up to ways that we never would imagine we would have to step up. And in a certain sense, they are also the heroes and heroines of this story. And therefore, it was only appropriate tonight that we showcase both the rabbis and the rebbetzins for the wonderful communities that we have across Hertfordshire, working together as one great community, which is so special, and really showcasing this to the world as well. I want to begin by introducing Rabbi Taylor, one of the newest rabbinic couples on the block, who will share with us a chapter of Tehillim, a parak of Tehillim for those that are suffering from the coronavirus and other people that are sick in the world. Thank you, Rabbi Taylor.
Rabbi Garston, thank you so much. I've just shared my screen. I'm going to recite Psalms chapter 121. I'm reciting this for the refuah shalem of people who are not well, be it with COVID or anything else. Feel free to join along with me. I've shared the screen. The words are on the screen. Shir lama'alot esa einai el harim me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz al yitein lamot raglecha al yanum shomerecha hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan shomeh Yisrael Adonai shomrecha Adonai tzilcha al yad yeminecha Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yareach balayla Adonai yishmercha mikol ra Yishma et nafshecha Adonai yishma tzitzcha v'recha me'ata v'yad olam.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi. B'ezrat Hashem, everyone should have a refuah shalema. We now move on to our first speaker of the night, Rebbetzin Taylor, who will be speaking on the title of Yehuda, Chanukah, and a candle in a potato. Thank you, Rebbetzin Taylor.
Thank you. Okay, change seats. Thank you so much for including us this evening. It's really wonderful to be part of such a fantastic event. So I remember last Chanukah seeing social media flooded by images of families lighting menorahs and children playing dreidels and people enjoying jam-filled donuts. But there was one image, however, that went totally viral. It was reshared and shared again throughout the whole world. The picture was of a Chanukiah, and next to it on the mantle was a wick lit inside a potato. Hatzalah volunteers who took this picture before wheeling the woman out of her home, they asked her husband the significance of this potato. And he answered that as well as the regular Chanukiah that he lights every year, he also lights this potato to remind him of the menorah that he crafted and risked his life to light when he was in Auschwitz. The significance of this picture, especially on Chanukah, is why I believed it was shared by so many people online. And this message is something I want to share this evening in the few minutes that we have. So it's no coincidence that we read about the story of Joseph around Chanukah time. There are many comparisons we can make to Joseph and Chanukah. But today I want to focus not so much on Joseph, but on one of his brothers, Yehuda. We read in the Parsha of Vayeshev that we're going to learn this coming Shabbat, all about how Yosef was thrown into the pit and eventually taken out and sold and given and went down to Egypt. But if we look at the text, we see something very odd. The Torah recalls how Yaakov rips his garments in grief and mourning for his beloved son. And then straight away, straight after, we see how Yehuda, amidst the chaos of this family bereavement, he goes off to find a wife. It's very, very strange. I'm going to read the pasuk now. And it says, Vayhi ba'et hahi, vayered Yehuda me'et echav, vayet ad ish aduami ushmo chira. And the English is, and it was at that time, the same time that all of this was going on, all this sadness was going on, Yehuda went down and he married this daughter of a merchant called Shua. Now, Rashi explains that this word, vayered, that he went down, is not just a physical going down, but also in how he was perceived. Yehuda was in a position of leadership in his family. The brothers all trusted him, they all respected him. And here they're saying to him, if you had told us to return Joseph, we would have listened to you. Instead, you convinced us to sell him. And because of you, Joseph is now gone and our father is inconsolable. Yehuda went down in their eyes. He was perceived as something not as worthy as before, and he was blamed, rightly or wrongly, for this entire episode. In the same sentence, however, we see that Yehuda, in this deflated status, goes out and finds a wife. Not only does this seem very strange, but also quite insensitive. So what is going on here, and how does this relate to Chanukah? The Kotsuka Rebbe, the 18th century Hasidic Rebbe who lived in Poland, he shares a beautiful insight. He says that at this juncture, Yehuda had two options. Vayered, he was down. His family blamed him, and he probably blamed himself too for what had happened to Yosef. He could have easily used this as the beginning of a story of destruction and despair. He could have used this episode, this event, which was actually of his making, to sink deeper and deeper. But instead, he takes a different approach. He looks at the Torah as a blueprint, at the first command we were given, to be fruitful and multiply, to have a family. And he used that to drag him up from his pit of despair and start again. At that moment, there was nothing he could do to help to save Yosef. As far as he knew, Yosef was dead, but he had a choice how to move on with his life. That's not to say that he unburdened himself of any blame. He accepted the mistakes that he had made. He owned his own yerida, his downfall, and then used this as an opportunity to claw his way back up. And it is no coincidence that from this union that we read about is the roots of Moshiach, the individual who will bring us all up from our collective pit of pain and despair to a brighter future. Now, Chanukah is a time when we celebrate those that don't give up. People who look around at the bleakness of their surroundings and decide that this is not going to define them, but instead will push them to become better. Chanukah is a time when we celebrate the small band of Maccabees, the tiny inferior army who not just witnessed the Greeks trying to rid the Jews of their Judaism, but who were succeeding at it. They were surrounded by assimilation at alarming rates, people becoming heavily influenced by the hedonistic values of the Greeks. In this pit, the Jewish army refused to sink deeper, but instead they forged onwards and upwards, clambering up and over the edge to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. And yet, when they entered the Holy Temple, they looked everywhere for oil to rekindle the holy lights of the menorah, but there was none. They could have given up at that moment. They could have given in to the desperate situation they were surrounded by. But instead, after unearthing one tiny, unopened, untainted jar of olive oil, they light the holy vessel, even though they know they can only last a few short hours. But they never give up. They never let the episode they're living through define them. They use it as an opportunity to grow even stronger in their faith, believing that if they do their hishtadlut, if they do their bit, God will help. The Maccabees, like Yehuda, had to live with the images they experienced ingrained in their minds forevermore. The fighting and the fire of battle, as well as the guilt and the shame that accompanied Yehuda. Furthermore, the hero from our first story, the Holocaust survivor, after spending years incarcerated in a death camp, with the images forever on his soul, he did not allow the experience to drag him deeper into despair, but he lit his potato Chanukah with pride, shouting, Look what I survived, and despite this, look around at what I have created. Each night of Chanukah, we light one more candle. We go back. We recognize our past. Candle 1, candle 2, and then we light another one. Chanukah is a time for us to remember that we are individuals and a nation who never gives up. We acknowledge our past, even if the mistakes were ours. And by doing so, we make the fire shine even brighter than it did before. Good evening.
Thank you, Rebbe Taylor, for that beautiful and inspiring Devar Torah. We now move on to the Senior Rabbi of Baltimore and Elstree United Synagogue, my dear colleague, Rabbi Chapper, who will be speaking about the very fascinating topic of the mystery inside the donut, food for the body and soul. Rabbi Chapper.
Thank you, Rabbi Garson. Thank you, Rebbe Taylor. And to all the other rabbis and Rebbetzins who are joining us this evening for this power hour. It's wonderful once again to be able to get together and learn in this way. We'll bring all the communities together through Actus. It's a beautiful theme for Chanukah. As Rabbi Garson said, I would like to speak about a really important subject this evening, and that's donuts. Let's be honest, that's one of the most important parts of Chanukah, eating donuts. I remember somebody once worked in one of the bakeries told me the amount of dough and jam they went through at Chanukah times, unbelievable. I can't remember the amount. But also I remember once, a few years ago, a couple of days before Chanukah, walking into a bakery, which will remain nameless. I won't name which bakery it is. It was a kosher bakery. And I went up to the counter and I asked them, I'd like some donuts for Chanukah. And the person behind the counter said to me, well, what type of donuts would you like? Would you like chocolate donuts, custard, apple, cinnamon, blueberry, on and on and on. They went with this list. I said, no, I want donuts for Chanukah. They said, yes, we heard you. You said, well, do you want chocolate ones? Do you want custard ones? Do you want apple ones, cinnamon ones, blueberry ones? I said, no, I just want donuts for Chanukah, please. And they said, we don't understand. I said, well, Chanukah donuts, donuts with jam in the middle. For me, and I think for most people, that is really the Chanukah donut. It has to have jam in the middle. Now, I haven't seen that brought down in Halacha anywhere, but I'm going to try to explain the mystery behind what it is inside the donut and why it has to have something inside it. Now, in order to understand that, we have to understand what is inside the donut that represents. I want to share with you this idea. We say every day on Chanukah in Al Hanisim, we say, "B'mei Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol." It was in the days of Matisyahu the Kohen Gadol, Hashmonahu Vanav, the Hasmonean and his sons, when the wicked kingdom of Greece came against the Jewish people, in order to make us forget your Torah, God, and to uproot us from the statutes of your will. And what does that mean? What does it mean they try to make us forget your Torah and try to remove from us the statutes of your will? Well, the Rambam tells us, and the Mishnah Torah tells us, he says, that the kingdom of Greece made decrees against the Jewish people, and negated our teachings, and they did not allow us to be involved in Torah and mitzvahs. That tells it a bit more. The Masei Rakev tells us the three specific mitzvahs that the Greeks forbade us from observing. Shebidlu mehem Shabbos, Mila, v'Rosh Chodesh. The Jews at the time of the Greeks forbade us to observe Shabbos, to perform bris milah, circumcision, and to observe and to calculate Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of the new month. And the question is obvious. Why? What do the Greeks have with these three mitzvahs specifically? What do these three mitzvahs represent, which the Greeks had a big issue with? Now, so a beautiful idea, I hope we can answer this, in the Nesiva Shalom. Nesiva Shalom tells us there are actually two types of emunah. There are two different aspects to faith. The first one is emunas Hashem, the understanding that God is involved in the big picture issues like life and death, war and famine, disease and disaster. But emunah also means, even more significantly, that we have the knowledge that God is involved in the minutiae of our daily lives. That God is here with us 24/7, 365 days of the year, all day, every day, from morning until night. That's the first type of emunah. But there's another type of emunah, which he refers to as emunah, is quoting a pasuk in the Devarim, emunah ki chelek Hashem amoy, that Hashem's portion is his people. that we are, God and we and the Jewish people are wrapped up amongst each other. And that is defined and described by those three mitzvahs. Bris milah, circumcision, expresses this emunah. As we say, it's an os bris, the covenant of the bris, beini v'nechem, between us and between God. Shabbos is the Yesod HaEmunah, is the foundation of faith, in that God created the world, and again the special relationship, the special relationship we have with God. And Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, is an expression of emunah, of faith, in firstly survival in darkness, the fact that the moon seems to disappear and then reappear, and also its renewal. So those are the three types of emunah that are wrapped up in those three types of mitzvahs. Now, to understand what the Greeks were trying to achieve, we have to see a Gemara in Malchus. The Gemara tells us something fascinating. We know that there are 613 mitzvahs in the whole of the Torah. But the Gemara tells us that David HaMelech came along and established those 613 mitzvahs on 11 principles. And the commentaries explain that what he was trying to do was trying to distill them into principles in which we could then base it on. And the Gemara goes on to say how later leaders also reduced it down until we get to the last one. Says the Gemara, Habakkuk the prophet came and established the Torah on one principle. And what is that principle? It's summarized in 3 words. But tzaddik be'emunaso yichyeh, that a righteous person shall live by his faith. And what does that mean? Well, the Rivera explains that when Habakkuk said this, he meant that if a person can live by this principle, if they can fulfill this mitzvah of living by faith, then they have fulfilled, as it were, the whole of the Torah. And the Maharsha goes further and he says that when Habakkuk says the tzaddik be'emunas yichyeh, that a righteous person shall live by their faith, he said this is the one principle which includes all of the mitzvahs. All of the Jewish people, the whole work of the Jewish people is included at this moment. They have emunah. It is as if they're doing every single one of the mitzvahs. Because the very first mitzvah that we were given, Mipia Gvura, from God himself, is what? Emunah Hashem, to believe in Hashem. And therefore the very first mitzvah is in fact what includes all of the other mitzvahs that go after it. And therefore to have emunah in Hashem is like fulfilling the whole of the Torah. Now, with that in mind, we can now understand what the Greeks were trying to achieve. We know that Greek philosophy was this. They only believed in what they could see. They only liked things you could measure, things you could determine. Science was the king for them. And that is why they tried to uproot emunah from the Jewish people. These 2 types of emunah. They didn't want us, firstly, to believe in an unseen God. And even more so, they actually forced us to write that we'd have no chelik if there was a God, and we had no portion with this God whatsoever. But we know as Jews that we believe, our principle is, our philosophy is that we believe in that there's something there's more than meets the eye. And that is why specifically on Chanukah, which is the victory over Jewish philosophy of there's more than meets the eye, over Greek philosophy is all you can see is what you can see. That's why on Chanukah we celebrate, amongst other things, by eating jam-filled donuts. Because when you take a donut, a person who's never eaten a donut before, and they take a bite into the donut, I think it's lovely, sweet, fried ball of dough. They don't think there's anything else there. They can't see anything else. They don't know what there's a surprise waiting for them. But when they hit the jam, or the jam sometimes even worse hits them, then they realize, actually, I didn't realize there was something behind the scenes all along. Now for us, that mystery inside the donut is food both for our body and for our soul, to remind us at this wonderful time we be in the darkness of winter, that although we can't see God, God is always with us. I wish you all a Chanukah Sameach, a very enjoyable Chanukah, and particularly an enjoyable donuts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi. We will never eat donuts in the same way again. Beautiful, beautiful insights. Thank you. We move on to Rebbetzin Garber from Shenley United Synagogue, who will be talking about the wonderful topic of sharing the light and the shamash of the menorah. Thank you, Rebbetzin.
Thank you, Rabbi Garson. Every child knows that if you want to know which night of Hanukkah it is, you just need to count the lights on the Hanukkah. It's the first night of Hanukkah. But Mummy, there are 2 candles burning, 2 lights, not 1. Isn't it the second night of Hanukkah? 2 lights? No, there's only one. That one on top there, that's the shamash. He doesn't count. It's the third night of Hanukkah, and 3 candles are burning. No, Mummy, there's 4. 4? No, there's only 3. Don't count the shamash. He's separate. He doesn't count. But why doesn't he count? It's a very good question indeed. Why doesn't the shamash count? Every Hanukkah menorah has 9 branches. There are 8 for each night of Hanukkah, and there is a 9th branch which holds the shamash. The shamash is a helper candle. It's the one we use to kindle the other lights. It stands tall and watches over them all. The shamash is there in case one of the other candles needs rekindling. This way, if one of the candles blows out, or if a candle is needed for another task, we will use the shamash instead of one of the mitzvah candles. The shamash is never counted. It is there for the others, but not part of the group. This might appear to always be the case. Ever been to a garden barbecue? The person busily preparing the meat and tending to the barbecue grill is never really part of the party, even after he removes his apron and joins in with everyone else. The tour guide leading the group engages everyone, but isn't in any of the photographs. She's the one who's taken all the photos. The shamash doesn't acquire the same status as one of the flames of the Chanukah. He is the servant and the helper. He stands taller and separate from all the others. There is a lot that we can learn from this. This helper candle provides a message to all leaders and all people of influence. Yes, it is true that the shamash is not a mitzvah candle. It is, however, an enabler. It allows the other candles to form a mitzvah. Vibrant individuals are not those who do what they can to make life better for others by extending themselves. When we look outside ourselves to kindle the light in others, it allows us to focus away from ourselves and to act as a conduit. We can then bring light, love, empowerment, and inspiration to others. Each of us has the potential to be a shamash. We all have a responsibility to become leaders and influencers and impact the lives of those around us. Greatness comes through using a set of skills to lift others up too. The shamash is usually placed above the other candles and separate. Greatness is achieved not by pushing others down, but by sharing the light. Hanukkah takes place during the shortest days of the year, at a time when the moon is barely visible in the sky and it fades before it reappears. It is the only Jewish holiday at the end of the month, rather than the middle, when the moon is at its brightest. We start with 1 candle and add 1 additional candle for each of the 8 consecutive nights. Each night, the Chanukah grows brighter and emanates more light and warmth into our home and also into our hearts. As we gaze at the lights, we are nostalgically connected in time with previous celebrations spent with family and with friends. Candles have something very unique and special about them, which makes them more physical, more than physical, which makes them more physical than spiritual. When we draw on physical resources, they become diminished, yet spirituality expands as it is used. Money and time are physical commodities, which leave less as they are spent. Food, which we remove from the fridge, leaves shelves depleted and they need to be restocked. Electric cars no longer require petrol, but have a finite span before they, like mobile phones, need to be recharged. Spiritual matters increase as we use them. When I use my skills and knowledge to teach, the student learns and I grow in experience and understanding and wisdom. Sharing love with other people promotes a feeling of more love rather than less. Spiritual gifts result in a situation where the recipient gains and we do not lose out anything. Candles share this same spiritual property. When you use one light to light up another, the original candle remains bright. Its flame and light does not become diminished and smaller by being shared. In fact, the opposite is true. The original candle and the light and the lit candle yield an overall brightness and increased light. Light is an amazing thing. When you light another candle from a previous candle, you do not diminish your own candle, you only add. Chanukah is a celebration to share our light. We answer the darkness of the world by bringing in more light. It is interesting that the 7 branches of the original temple menorah correspond to 7 openings in one's face. If we examine the face and the menorah, we notice something remarkable. They are almost identical in shape. 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, and a mouth. That is almost the same shape, the shape of the original branches of the menorah. The purpose of the menorah is to illuminate and to bring light into the world. Panim, the Hebrew word for face, shares its root with panemius, our inner selves. We need to find our own personal menorah within our face and radiate our joy and light to those around us. Perhaps this Chanukah, in addition to doing our own personal Chanukah lighting at home, let's seek to brighten the lives of others around us through personal interactions and effort to reach out to others to share the light. Happy Chanukah.
Thank you, Rebbetzin Garber, for that beautiful Torah thought. We now move on to Rabbi Hai of the Rambam Synagogue of Bournemouth. Is he with us? There he is.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Garson, and thank you to everybody else for being here and to all those that organized this wonderful event. I think it's remarkable that we can get together, even during these circumstances that we're in, to share and experience our thoughts together. So wishing you all a happy Chanukah. I just wanted to discuss the Choshech of Yavam, the darkness of the Greek Empire, because to me, to really appreciate Or Chanukah, the light of Chanukah, I think we first have to acknowledge and understand the darkness of Yavan before seeing what that Or took us out of and really acknowledging and appreciating that. The Torah in Bereshit, in Genesis, it begins with one of the first few psukim is V'choshech al penei tohom, and there was an immense darkness throughout the world at the beginning of creation. The Chachamim in Midrash Rabbah, the Chachamim in the Midrash say, the Choshech refers to Malchut Yavan. This refers to the kingdom, the empire, the culture of Yavan. That is actually described by the Torah as Choshech. So obviously this is a hint in the Sefer Bereshit to the Malchut Yavan. Yavan is Choshech. There's something about the fundamental nature of the culture of Yavan that the Torah refers to as Choshech, darkness. At face value, that's what's quite perplexing. The Greek culture was probably the most advanced culture of that era. Greek philosophy is famous and studied till today. The Greeks were a progressive nation and they were clearly, one might actually refer to them as enlightening. Isn't it alarming? Isn't it shocking and surprising that the Torah actually refers to the Greek culture as choshech, as darkness? What was the tremendous darkness of the Greek nation that we required the Or of Chanukah, the light of Chanukah, to take us out of that darkness? If we look at the world around us, there's an undeniable development and progression through technological advances, and there's a wonderful system that allows us to actually find out so much about so much. Knowledge is at the tips of our fingers. We can learn about so many things with such ease. Our knowledge base is massive. It's wonderful, it's tremendous. If we would tell people of 200, 150 years ago even, of the things that we have today, the luxuries that we have today, I'm sure they would look at us as people who are living in a utopia. We have fridges, we have cars, we have phones and computers, not to mention many, many other things. Yet, we don't feel like we're in a utopia. There certainly isn't a clear tally between our technological advances and our happiness and our feeling of being content and satisfied. Why is this? Clearly, just knowing how things work and all the wonderful things that come along with knowledge aren't enough for us. They aren't enough to keep us, to make us happy, to bring us to satisfaction. Because all these things are chokhmah that are slightly detached from our identity. However intellectual the knowledge may be, it isn't bringing me to a different place. It doesn't make me a different me. The I that began studying and finding out about this knowledge is the same I after the knowledge. The knowledge is great. It can be used for wonderful things, but it doesn't inherently and fundamentally make me a different person. That is a true choshech, because it actually doesn't have a light at the end of its destination. The Torah, however, the Torah, which seems to be the antithesis, diametrically opposing Chokhmat Yavan, the wisdom of Yavan, is described somewhat differently. David HaMelech in Tehillim says about the Torah in Psalms, Torat Adonai Temima Meshivat Nafesh. The Torah is something that brings us back to our nefesh. It brings us back to ourself. It's not only about what you know. It's not only about knowing how to operate oneself and one's environment. It's about bringing us back to ourselves. It's about revealing our higher and inner self. In the beginning of the Sefer Tehillim, David HaMelech writes in the same sentence, the Torah is described by King David as Torat Hashem and Torato. Hashem's Torah, yet in the same sentence, it's referred to as his Torah, the man's Torah. Rashi picks up on this point. He points out the subtle difference that King David is referring to in the Torah. First, David HaMelech calls it Torat Hashem and then Torato. Says Rashi, the Torah initially is called Torat Hashem. Misha Amelba, once a person has toiled in the Torah, once a person has exerted effort into understanding and living by the Torah, it becomes his Torah. It becomes the individual's Torah. The Or of Chanukah, the light of Chanukah, is that realization that we have been given Torat Hashem, which isn't only a wonderful chokhmah. It's not only wonderful wisdom and knowledge, but it's the knowledge that's not detached from our identity. On the contrary, it brings us back to ourselves. It lets us realize who we are. It's a different person who begins living by the Torah than when he goes on his way on living by the Torah. He becomes a different individual. He or she becomes closer to the inner self, as David HaMelech says, Meshivat Nafesh. So I wish all of us and the whole of Klal Yisrael throughout the world to really experience the Or of Chanukah this year and to help this propel us forward into getting closer to ourselves through the Or HaTorah and the Or of Chanukah. Chanukah Sameach, everybody.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for that incredible idea. We move now to Bushy United Synagogue for Rebbetzin Feldman, who will be sharing with us the idea of the Pintel Yid, igniting the spark. Thank you, Rebbetzin.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening, everyone. Whenever my parents didn't want us to understand what they were speaking about, they would talk to each other in a Yiddish-German combination. This meant that I was actually quite good at German when we learnt it in school, as whenever they would talk in this strange foreign language, my siblings and I would try extra hard to understand what they were saying based on their tone and context. No, my Yiddish is not very extensive by any means, but the wonderful phrase which I have picked up and love is the Pintel Yid, the little Jew inside each of us, the spark that is never extinguished. Let me share with you a very personal story about a Pintel Yid. Little Rosie was the youngest of 13 in a loving Hasidic family in Poland. As the shadow of the Third Reich began to creep over her village, the family moved to Austria, and in December 1938, her parents made the heartbreaking decision to send their children abroad in the hope of keeping them safe and praying that they would be once again reunited. Rosie came to England on the Kindertransport under the care of Rabbi Dr. Schonfeld. How fortunate she was to have escaped. But sadly, this little 12-year-old girl had said goodbye to her parents for the last time. She was taken in by a wonderful, caring Christian family. Rosie did not know English, but she knew enough to say, potatoes, yes, meat, no, as she knew the kosher home she had been raised in. Time went on, and this family was so kind to Rosie. In fact, they wanted to adopt her. But eventually, at the end of the war, she went to live with her older sister and fell in love with a Jewish, though completely irreligious, British soldier. They were married and had 2 sons. When their son was old enough to be sent to school, they sent him to Hasmonean Primary School. This young man would come home from reception and share how he had learnt about milk and meat and a kosher kitchen, how he had learnt about keeping Shabbos. Rosie's Pintel Yid, the small spark inside her, was reignited as she recalled the wonderful home she had been raised in with Shabbos and kosher, and she began to make changes so that their home looked more like the home that her son was learning about in school, the home she had been raised in. That little boy grew up, and the Pintel Yid continued to burn, and now he has children and grandchildren who live the lifestyle that Rosie's parents could recognize and be proud of. How do I know? Because that little boy is my father, Rosie of blessed memory was my grandmother, and each of us in our own way are attempting to connect with and keep our Pintel Yid burning. Chanukah, the festival of light, takes place in the darkest, coldest part of winter. To appreciate light, you need to have darkness. If I light a candle in a light room, it does not have much of an impact. But if you turn off the light, then the candle can truly burn bright. As Rabbi Hai so beautifully explained, the Greeks symbolized darkness, even though they were more cultured and more knowledgeable in art, sports, medicine, and science than perhaps any civilization. Though they strove to bring enlightenment to the world, to the Jewish people, they represented darkness. This nation did not want to destroy us physically as the Egyptians and Babylonians did. They even admired our culture and respected our wisdom, but they were vehemently opposed and sought to destroy us spiritually. They wanted to disconnect the physical world from the spiritual world. They wanted to show how the world of maths, science, and nature has nothing to do with God. As a scientist, this idea is particularly painful to me, and one that I often saw amongst our lecturers when at university. To me, science, nature, and the world around us only strengthens my awe and appreciation for Hashem and the incredible world he has created. The beautiful menorah in the Bet HaMikdash in the temple represented the coming together of the physical with the light of the spiritual. For this reason, the Greeks specifically contaminated the oil, because the oil is for the menorah, because from the oil comes the light. But throughout all their defilement, there remained a pure flask of oil, untouched, untainted, like the pure spark in the heart of every Jew. However distant they may be from their people and the one who watches over them. That little flask of pure oil is the Pintel Yid. That little flask, that little spark, the little point of purity, which can never be dominated by the Greeks of every generation. And the joy of connecting and recognizing the Pintel Yid in someone else is part of the joy of Chanukah. Perhaps that is why we all love to let someone else know when we are a part of the tribe, the phenomenon known as bageling or beigeling. Just yesterday, I was paying in a shop and used my maiden name Rosenberg, which was on my debit card. "Oh, I know how to spell that," said the shopkeeper. "I'm also Jewish." And I smiled to myself as he asked me if it was an E or a U, as I thought that someone who was not Jewish would probably also have known how to spell Rosenberg and asked the same question. But to us both, what was important was that we were connected. We both had a Pintele Yid inside us, a spark that is lit and will always be lit. Chanukah shares the root with the word chinuch, which is education. The task for us on this festival, as we light the candles of our menorah, is to focus on the mitzvah of chinuch, to educate ourselves and those around us. What sort of education? King Solomon, the wisest of all men, teaches in Proverbs, Ner Hashem nishmas Adam. The soul of man is the lamp or the candle of the Lord. The light of a candle which we light during the cycle of the year and the cycle of life represents our soul, the part of us which is a part of Hashem, our neshama. That is the part of us which our chinuch, our education, must be focused on. Our role this Chanukah is to find our own Pintele Yid, reconnect with our spark of Judaism and fan it into a flame, and then join with the beautiful sparks of the Jewish soul inside each other, and together we will have a menorah that shines so bright that no darkness can ever extinguish it. Wishing you all a happy Chanukah and a big Yasher Koach to the incredible sparks that are Rabbi and Rebbetzin Garson for arranging this wonderful cross-communal initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebbetzin, for that beautiful, beautiful idea. We now move on to Rebbetzin Hoch from the Jewish Life Center, Chabad of Boron Wood. We'll be speaking on Chanukah, a woman's victory. Over to you, Rebbetzin. You have to unmute yourself, sorry.
Sorry about that. Good evening. It's always very tough to speaking after such inspiring Rabbanim and Rebbetzin. So thank you so much for having me this evening. I'd like to touch on the Chanukah story from a slightly different angle. There's a well-known custom that after lighting the candles, we sit for half an hour by the menorah light. During this half an hour, the custom is that women should not do any work. They should just sit and relax. Now, this is the only time of year that I get the pass to sit and relax while everyone around me can do work. And yeah, I actually take complete advantage of it. So I get a good 4 hours over the 8 days of Chanukah to put my feet up, and I'm really looking forward to this. So why do women earn this special half an hour each day to not work? What is it that we do, especially on Chanukah, that gives us this pass to sit by the menorah lights? So it's taught in the halachic work in Matan Moshe by the great authority, the Magen Avraham, that it was because of the great and brave acts of Yehudit and what she did for the Jewish people. So let's remind ourselves a bit about what Yehudit did, and I'll just give a little bit of quick background. So Yehudit lived at the same time of the Greek Revolution and was related to the Maccabees. Some say she was actually a Hasmonean and the sister of the Maccabees. She lived in a small village outside the main city in which the Greeks were systematically dismantling every bit of humanity and moral the Jews had, attempting to force them to surrender to the Greek lifestyle. The elders of the village were ready to give up all hope and surrender, and they gave it just 3 more days. But Yehudit took stand, and after much convincing, the elders agreed to allow her to execute her plan. What was her plan? She was going to visit the cruel, powerful general Holofernes and make sure something is done. So her village was saved. She went with her maid with a basket of cheese and wine and managed to use her charm and grace to gain trust and have a private meeting with the general. I'm not going into detail of the account of what happened, but in short, she fed him enough cheese and wine and he became very drunk. She took his sword and killed him. This brave and incredible act was a turning point in the rebellion and gave the Jewish people an enormous morale boost. So now we understand why women don't work while the candles are lit. Do we understand anything? As incredible as what Yehudit did, So did her brothers, the Maccabees. They fought really hard with a tiny army against the Syrian Greek world power at that time. It was like a Lego army versus a live war machine. So what made Yehudit's act so incredible? Even further, when it comes to what the Maccabees did, who were the men in the army, we celebrate their victory, both men and women. We all have the obligation to light the menorah, whether it's on our own or we hear somebody else say the blessing. The victory of Hanukkah, we don't say is just for men. It's celebrated by men, women, and children. So why, when it comes to Yehudit and her story, do we say this is a special custom just for women? So I haven't seen any response or explanation to this. However, I'd like to suggest the following. In the Talmud, in Tractate Shabbat, it asks the question, my Chanukah, what is the essential miracle of Chanukah? And answers that it was the miracle of the small jug of oil that lasted 8 days. It doesn't say it was the war, not the victory, not the many in the hands of few, not the strong vanquished by the weak. It was just the oil, the miracle of oil. So Hasidus teaches us that oil represents faith, because just as oil rises above most other liquids, faith rises above and beyond our intellect and natural capabilities. There are many times in life where intellectual and natural skills are insufficient. We require reaching out beyond ourselves to a greater source of energy and capacity in order to get us through the tough times. The oppression of the Syrian Greeks was one such of those times where we experienced this as people and as a nation. We did not have the power and might physically, spiritually, or emotionally to withstand the powerful intellectual, ideological, and social pressure of bowing to the Greek way of life. And so the miracle was the renewed faith. The miracle was that we reached out just in the nick of time to grab hold of the deeper strength within ourselves that comes with faith. And that was sparked and inspired and set aflame by Yehudit. I'm not suggesting, God forbid, that the Maccabees lacked faith. They certainly were people of great faith. However, when we look at their story, the mistake could be made that their fight was one of great humanism and self-confidence. The story of the sister can be seen in one way only. Yehudit was a woman of great courage that could only result from the deepest form of faith. She walked into the general Halifax with no weaponry, only cheese and wine. The story of Yehudit is really the story of the Jewish people, going all the way back to the Jewish women in Egypt, encouraging their husbands to have faith in God and to keep living when all seemed lost. Therefore, when the Talmud asks, my Chanukah, and answers that Chanukah is the holiday of oil, the holiday of faith, we can understand indeed why it's specifically the women who rest while the candles are lit, because it was indeed a miracle that came about through them and through their unshakable faith. So please God, we should all tap this Chanukah into our faith, courage, and inner strength to get through any challenging times and continue to bring light to the world. And I hope all the women out there are looking forward to those 4 hours of putting their feet up by the menorah light over the next 8 days of Chanukah as much as I am. Wishing you all a Chanukah Sameach.
Thank you, Rebbetzin Hoch, for that fantastic and beautiful Torah thought. I'm just going to finish up here before we pass on to Rabbi Feldman. I'm going to be speaking about human miracles versus God's miracles, which are bigger. Now, as Jews, we certainly believe in miracles. We have holidays commemorating miracles. You have the holiday of Hanukkah, we have the holiday of Purim. And on both of these days, on these holidays, we say a prayer, part of our service, part of Birkat Hamazon, called Al Hanisim. That tefillah gives thanks to Hashem for having been privileged to witness those miracles. And on both of them, we also make a bracha of gratitude to Hashem, She'asa nisim la'avotenu bayamim hahem bazeman hazeh, who performed miracles for our ancestors in those days at this season. Miracles are not something that we take for granted. Religious response requires some form of verbal expression, so we have all these blessings. But there's something very strange about the fact that it's only these relatively late holidays, which are non-biblical, they're not in the Torah, Purim and Chanukah, where we specifically emphasize miracles. I saw that Rabbi Bleich many years ago from Yeshiva University asked a fantastic question. Surely, if we think of all the holidays in the Jewish world, Pesach should have deserved an Al Nisim. The Exodus was filled with miracles. We had 10 plagues. We had the splitting of the sea. All absolutely awesome events which give witness to the miracle and divine intervention by Hashem. But the bracha of Al Nisim, which acknowledges miracles, makes no appearance on Pesach. Why? Not only that, Shavuot, when the Jewish people stood by Har Sinai, when we received God's Torah, that too has no Al Nisim. And guess what? Comes Sukkot, which commemorates the very survival of the Jewish people for so many years in the desert as they were sustained by incredible food that fell from the heavens and water from a well in the merit of Miriam, protected by divine clouds of glory. There's no bracha made. So why do we recognize the miracles of Chanukah and Purim differently to the miracles that are written in the Torah? I think the answer goes to the heart of a very remarkable distinction that as Jews and Judaism as a totality makes between two types of miracles. The world as a whole acknowledges supernatural miracles. They're pretty cool. They're performed by God. And Jews acclaim miracles that result from superhuman efforts from mankind as well. It's not only Hashem who is capable of unimaginable achievements of miracles. His creations, mankind, can also rise to the absolute pinnacle of heights of spiritual achievements and fulfillment. And when they do that, that is a miracle. Friends, if we think about it in a certain sense, when Hashem does something that overrides nature, he splits the sea, he changes water into blood. It's not really a big deal. After all, he is the Almighty, he is God. He can do anything. But it's man's miracles which rightfully deserve our greatest respect, our greatest reverence, our greatest awe. The miracles of human beings are the reason for the emphasis of the miracles on the holidays of Purim and on Chanukah, because they speak of moments in time, of historic snapshot moments where people rose to the challenge of living to their potential, of attaining incredible spiritual heights that created real miracles because they used their God-given gifts of courage, of faith, and wisdom. If we think about it, Megillat Esther, which is the scroll we read on Purim, is unique as we know that Hashem's name does not appear in it at all. Hashem remains hidden. It's named after Esther, which also remains hidden, but it's named after the queen of Esther. She understood that the role of our people on earth is not simply to pray for miracles, but more poignantly, it's to become a miracle. Facing the peril of the very first genocide against the Jewish people by a despot by the name of Haman, her, together with her brother, uncle Mordechai, and the heroism of the Jewish people, responded. And heroes and heroines are miracles. They prove that we have the ability to imitate Hashem and to accomplish miracles. And tomorrow night, when Chanukah begins, it's a story of heroic achievements, like we just heard from Rebbe Hoch about Yehudit, but also the family of the Maccabees, a small family with deep spiritual ideals who stood up against an empire, the few against the many. The Hashmonim had zero chance of victory. All they had in their back pocket was emunah, was faith, and potentials as Avdei Hashem, as servants of Hashem, to achieve that which is impossible. That made it possible for them to become divine agents of an unlikely miracle. I want to just conclude with one brief thought. The word in Hebrew for miracle is nes, which comes from the root word nisayon. It's a test. Miracles are nothing less than tests of our divine potential. When human beings pass divine challenges, we are witnesses to what worthy is becoming a true miracle. If we go back not very long ago in Russia, the refuseniks was that unofficial name for individuals in this former Soviet Union who had denied the right to immigrate. One such man was Yosef Mendelevich. The KGB caught him, they tortured him for spreading false propaganda. His only crime was teaching Hebrew to Jews who wanted to be a Jew. He was thrown into solitary confinement, but he incredibly calculated when the Jewish holidays were. Chanukah was fast approaching. He craved for his menorah, a symbol that represented the battle against the forces of evil. The government had banned Torah study. They banned anything that was Jewish. He just wished to see that glow. But how are you going to do that in Siberia? In the middle of nowhere, no oil, no wicks, no menorah. The day before Chanukah, he managed to obtain one match from a guard. For a wick, he used a bit of cloth from his prison uniform, but he had no oil. And as he stood there on the first night of Chanukah, a thought flashed across his mind. He picked up a jagged rock and he chiseled out into the walls of his prison cell the shape of a menorah. He took the wick, he wedged it into the crack, and he lit it with the match. It only burned for a few seconds, but it ignited, and it illuminated in that dark Siberian cell, giving hope and promise to a bold and brave Jew. Because after it went out, it continued to burn strong inside the soul of this refusenik who survived and moved to Israel. Years later, when he was speaking to a group of school children, he was asked, why did you keep mitzvot under such circumstances? Why didn't you just give up? His response was timeless. Can you tell a tree not to grow? Friends, a Jew by definition has the nature to develop and to grow. The greater the difficulty, the harder the challenge, the more opportunities to grow. Chanukah is that holiday that could never be obliterated because it represents a desire which never dies. It's a time to express our gratitude for miracles that were initiated by man, reminding each and every single one of us that we are all indeed a tremendously bright and burning miracle. Chanukah Sameach. Rabbi Feldman, over to you to close.
Talk about miracles. A miracle, 10 Rabbanim and Rebbetzins managing to finish punkt in just 1 hour for the power hour. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what miracle can possibly be stated for Chanukah. Just following on to conclude, the beautiful words of all the Rabbanim and Rebbetzins, a Yasher Koach, a massive thank you to all of them for their contributions across the Achdut, the harmony of the Herts communities, the Rabbanim and Rebbetzins with Herts. It's been such a beautiful evening. We paskin in the Shulchan Aruch, Hadlaka Ose Mitzvah. Rather than the miracle of Chanukah being to have a menorah lit, but rather it's the lighting itself, which is the actual mitzvah. That's why we say lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, to light it, because once it's lit, then it's in Hashem's hands. What can happen from lighting a neshama, lighting a flame, lighting a candle, illuminating a room? Hopefully this evening has been the preparation, the hachana, the steps that we can take to be ready to begin our own lighting over the 8 days of Chanukah, which begins tomorrow evening. What a beautiful way to commence. What a beautiful evening of preparation. Thank you all for joining us and being part of the first stages of the Hadlakah. We truly hope and wish that all of you will have a healthy and happy and joyous Chanukah within your own communities and as part of our Hartsmere larger community. On behalf of the Rabbanim and Rebbetzins, Chanukah Sameach, and have a wonderful evening.